Hey y'all, Austin here with Outer World Media. Welcome back to another book review. This time again it is Louis Lamour, but this time we are talking No Traveler Returns. So kind of getting into this, if you saw my TBR video for the month of July, I talked about how, I wanted to read a war novel, just with it being 4th of July and whatnot. I have a few Louis Lamour books that, are war novels. Two of them, I believe, are short stories. And I had this one. In the back, this says this is, the very end, the shadows of World War II and whatnot. This takes place on the Lynching Field, which is like a tanker boat, which hauls like oil and all that other kind of stuff. Very volatile stuff. So I thought that's what this was going to be about. That is not the case. There's not really anything that talks about, the war in here. Hitler is mentioned just a little bit, but it's not what I was expecting. And I think that kind of threw me off when I first started this book. I've recorded this video or tried to a couple times, and I've had to stop because the more, I talk about this book, the more I start to remember from it, and the more I realize I did enjoy this book more than what I initially thought. So this, I will honestly say, I feel like this is Louis L'Amour's character insight book. What I mean by that is, there is some action in here and whatnot, but it's not your typical Louis L'Amour book. There's kind of two different parts to this book. So you have the second mate's journal entries, and then you have the background on the characters. And it's not the in-depth background of, where these characters come from and all that. It is a little bit about that, but it's what led them to get on the boat. We don't see them, as kids or whatnot. It's, a few months, a year leading up to them getting on the boat. And each chapter is not that long. So Louis L'Amour does a great job, as usual, kind of pacing this book. We do find out quite a bit about, certain characters in this book. This is not one that I would recommend for just anybody that's going to pick up a Louis L'Amour book for the first time. I would recommend, stick with like his Westerns or something like that. Just something, because again, this is not his typical book. There is some fighting and whatnot, but not like what you see in his other novels. I'm going to be honest with y'all. I think this is the darkest book I've ever read by Louis L'Amour, material-wise. What I mean by that, and I do apologize, there's going to be some spoilers in this book review. I can't not talk about them and review this book. So if you're wanting to, not hear any spoilers about this book, I do apologize. I hope there's a couple videos out there on YouTube. I'm sure there is, kind of going over this, not spoiling anything. But I feel like I need to tell y'all a couple things that happen in this book to make it, to get my point across and make it seem like, this really is the darkest, material-wise book that Louis L'Amour has written, that I've read at least. I have over 100 of his books. I don't own all of his books. I haven't read half of them, but I have read quite a few. Up to this point, I think the darkest thing that I've read in a Louis L'Amour book was probably, that last chapter in, Last of the Breed and whatnot. If you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, go read it, then come back and watch this. In any Louis L'Amour book, there's going to be fighting. There's going to be, cowboys versus Indians and whatnot. Which, obviously that means there's, some killing in it, but not to the degree of what this book has. Before I get into that, though, I'm just going to kind of, tell you a little bit, how this book starts off. We start off on the ship. This guy's doing some preventative maintenance, work on this ship with some rivets and whatnot, I believe. And he kind of cuts some corners and doesn't do his job all the way, and he leaves, and that comes back at the end of the book and whatnot. And I will say, reading that, and then as I've got further into this book, I honestly forgot about that until the very end of this book. And I was like, okay, I can see what he did there. So that is a slight spoiler. I do apologize. Again, I'm going to start the spoilers at this point. So we have that, like any Louis L'Amour book, you have your good guys, you have your bad guys. He does kind of have a little bit of a, I don't want to say morally gray character, but it's kind of, he's not necessarily bad, but he's not, good. He's someone, who does have a temper in this book, and whatnot. And he, what is his name? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go to the chapters to see what his name was. Oh, and it's not going to tell me. Let me see here. I'm going to have to, because I want to know. Oh, what is his name? I do apologize. I forget what his name is. But he's someone who, he doesn't really have any friends on this ship. He's got like one, and that guy is influencing him to do stuff and whatnot. And then you realize, okay, he's a bad guy, but he's not, to the extreme of what this other guy is. In this book, they talk about how, there is a beatdown of somebody on the ship and whatnot. And this character comes up to him in it and says, hey, they're gonna kill you, they're gonna throw you overboard, they're gonna beat you within an inch of your life. And he's like, well, I don't have an issue with these other guys, and as you see the character and him interact, you realize this other character has a hold on him, because he realizes if he can get this guy mad and angry and just feed him lies, then he snaps. So you kind of see, I don't want to say struggle with it, but you see that dynamic there. That, okay, you in this book, you're going to, like I said, you're going to have your good guys. You're going to have your one kind of morally gray character, because if he has an issue with somebody, he has an issue. But if he doesn't really mess with them. And then you have one guy in this book that, we find out he murdered an older guy. He goes on this ship. He's causing havoc. He's causing fights. He's trying to get people killed, and whatnot. And surprisingly, he's not the darkest character in this book, I don't think. Sorry, I gotta get some coffee. Still working on my first cup. There's a character in here and this is the darkest scene out of all of this. We see a scene where, a guy is gonna beat somebody with a lead pipe and whatnot. But there's a scene in this book where this character is getting, as a caregiver, whatnot, whatever you want to call it, a parental figure, and they are in Post, Texas, where, if you know where Post, Texas is, it's over here in West Texas. It's not too far from me. So I enjoyed reading that and seeing that in there. And then, Louis Lamour reference is Slayton, Texas, which isn't too far away from me. And then he he references Lubbock, Texas and whatnot. So it was kind of cool to see him reference, some areas. And, I kind of know the geographical areas and whatnot. So it's kind of cool to see that. So I was kind of telling my wife about that. And I dropped down a paragraph or two later. And what I read, I just stopped. I told my wife, she was watching one of her favorite shows. I told her, pause it, you got to hear this. So I read, 3 paragraphs to her of it, and she goes, what the hell are you reading? I said, it's a Louis Lamour book. She goes, does he normally write like that? And I said, no. So this is the biggest spoiler that I'm probably going to give you in this, review. So in this review, in this chapter, this character, like I said, he's in Post, Texas. He is, his caregiver comes home, parental figure, whatever you want to call it, and he's drunk. He proceeds to beat this kid till he passes out, which is pretty dark. It's not something that I would expect to read in a Louis Lamour book, to be honest with y'all. He didn't go in depth in detail, but it was still hard to read, because I would think for anybody reading something like that, reading adult beating on a kid and making him pass out, I think that would be hard for anybody. But it's what happens next that follows that really made this book pretty dark. So this kid proceeds to wake up and gain consciousness again. He sees that this guy's passed out in this trailer, drunk, passed out on this bed. So the kid proceeds to get some needle and thread. He takes the sheet that this guy's laying on, kind of like throws it over. He proceeds to stitch the sheet shut. Then he proceeds, once he has it, he knows the guy can't get out, he proceeds to beat this guy within an inch of his life. And then he flees. And reading that in a Louis Lamour book, that's not something I thought I would ever read. That it honestly caught me quite by surprise. again, I don't really know what more to say past that. That is, again, that's just not something I would expect to read in a Louis L'Amour book. For a second there, I thought I might have been reading, something like Stephen King would have wrote or something like that. And what I mean by that is, just the material. Because, reading that, I kind of feel like that's something I would see in like a different author, like a Stephen King book, kind of, if you've read, like It or something like that. Beverly and her dad have that dynamic. He's volatile and whatnot. So that's kind of what it felt like. I was reading, I was like, did Louis L'Amour really write this down? Write this in this book? So it caught me quite a bit by surprise. And I honestly didn't know what to think of this book. I'm gonna be honest with y'all, and this is gonna be, kind of just wrapping up this review. When I was reading this, I really didn't know what to think. I didn't really feel like I was enjoying it, but not as much as, I normally would enjoy a Louis L'Amour book. Again, this is very much a character study by Louis L'Amour, which was a little different for me to read from him. But the more I read, I was like, okay, I'm getting in the groove of this book. I'm liking it, I'm not going to say it's one of my favorite books by him or anything like that. And then when I sat down to record this review of, this book, I started talking about certain things that happened in the book and whatnot. And the more I started to realize, I guess I did like this book a little bit more than what I initially thought. I mean, we have quite a bit of stuff in here, mashups. We have one guy that's on the boat that was a race car driver who was in a wreck, who's like scarred and everything and deals with physical pain every day. And we see, that he's trying to be a good dad, but he doesn't know how to. We have movie actors in here. We have like a long lost family trivial thing in here, as far as someone's like, yeah, I don't know where my family is. I want to find them. My sister, I don't know where she's at. I know she's in Hollywood somewhere probably. We see, like I said, murder. I mean, the only thing this book really was missing for me, well, it was two things, pirates. I was really hoping that there would be pirates in here, after reading a couple Louis L'Amour books and just seeing pirates pop up out of nowhere and he just naturally puts them in. It doesn't feel like it's, shoved down my throat. There's pirates in here. I was kind of hoping that would be in here. There wasn't. So if you're hiding on Reed, who I'm hoping will watch this, I'm sorry, but there's no pirates in here, unfortunately. Well, I guess, there's some like dock bums. I guess you could consider that. Pirates, if you will. There's another scene in here where we see this guy who, he's riding the railroads and whatnot. He meets up with some other hobos who are going to help take care of him and whatnot. And they get off at this one station. And this guy who works in the yard comes over and he kind of like mugs them and beats them and whatnot. And he runs his mouth and he ends up getting killed. And then you see these three guys go on the run. And then there's a chase and a shootout. Again, Louis L'Amour really did fit quite a few things in this book. For being a book that's supposed to take place on a ship, he has fit quite a few things in this book. And again, the more I talk about this book, the more I realize, holy crap, I really do like this book more than what I initially thought. I think, give it time in a year or so, or two, if I want to reread this, I really could see myself liking it more, knowing now what I do after reading it and whatnot. Going into this expecting to be a war book, and that's on me. I assumed it was going to be that. I shouldn't have. I mean, that's that old saying when you assume something. So again, guys, this is a big mashup of quite a few different things. I really did enjoy this book. I would recommend this, highly recommend this to everybody. Again, I would not, if you're starting off reading a Louis L'Amour book, I wouldn't recommend this one. Get a few of his books under your belt, I would say, and then pick this up. Or if you want to say, what, throw me a curveball, let me read this, and then I'll read some of his other books, you'll notice quite a bit of a difference, as far as tone-wise goes. From this book to other books. And again, it's not just because it's on a ship, versus like a Western or something like that. There is definitely a tone to this book that these other books of his don't have. And I don't know really what else to say about this. Again, guys, I enjoyed this book. If you could pick up a physical copy, you get kind of like a diagram of, the ship, the Lichenfield, however you want to say it. You get diagrams of this book. Again, this is very much, You have this group of guys that are on the ship, and you explore their lives and what's led them beyond the ship, and then you see how everything's kind of connected. And we have the big climax at the end of this book. Again, guys, I mean, there's so much I could say. I mean, I forgot to tell y'all about, there's a guy who was on a ship. The ship went down, and him and some other people ended up going on like this life raft, and there was like 8 of them when they started out. By the time they were rescued, there was like 3 of them. And so you find out, a couple people went crazy, a couple of them just unfortunately passed away. So this guy's on trial, and it's essentially him versus this company that owned the ship, and the company's like, no, everything was up to safety standards, we did this, and then you had this guy who's like, no, I mean, that's not the case. And so you had this judge who, he's like, man, I'm sorry, but they have like all this money, it's your word against a huge corporation, leave, don't come back, would be my advice. This trial is going to start in a few days. So again, guys, there's so much that happened in this book, and I really should have, sat down and taken notes as I was reading this book. I really need to start doing that, but I didn't. But again, guys, there's so much that I didn't, get to say in this review. This is starting to be a longer review than what I anticipated, but there's just so much, like I've said, quite a few times in this review, there's so much in this book that I just haven't touched on. It really is a great book. The more I think about it, like I said, the more I feel like I like it. I was originally going to give it like a 3 out of 5 stars. I would probably give 4 out of 5. And again, when I go back and I reread this, I could probably see this going up, as the rating goes. So again, guys, highly recommend this. I can see probably why this isn't one of Louis L'Amour's more popular books. It's under his Lost Treasures collection. But I could see why this wouldn't be one of his more popular books, because this is not your typical, like I said, Louis L'Amour book. I've read Knights Older Solomon. This isn't like that. Again, that's a war book, kind of novella collection, whereas this is not. Again, guys, I really didn't know what to expect going into this. I felt like I was kind of disappointed, but the more I read it and got into the book, the more I seemed to like it, and the more I, reflect on this book, the more I realize I do like this. This is kind of the same situation as, the Sister Brothers, what the Sister Brothers was for me. I didn't really feel like I was enjoying as much as I was hoping to when I was reading it, but reflecting on it when I was doing that review, the more I realized I really liked that book quite a bit. So this is in good, good standings when you're comparing it to the Sister Brothers for me. I know that Faceless, he loved the Sister Brothers, and he's probably going to be interested. Faceless, I would recommend pick this up. You actually probably would enjoy it. Everybody out there, if you're, again, interested in a Louis L'Amour book, pick this up. If you find it on sale, $4 or $5, whatever, pick it up, guys. I promise you will enjoy it. It's quite a good book. I mean, it comes in a little under 300 pages. There's quite a long afterword, and then there you get a little bit of, talking about this, going over what the Lost Treasures is and whatnot. And there's a preface, by Beau L'Amour and whatnot. So again, guys, and I'm going to drop the book here. I'm so sorry. Again, guys, No Traveler Returns by Louis Lamour. Should you pick this book up? Yes. If you can't tell, again, this is probably one of the longest book reviews I've ever done on this channel thus far. I really enjoyed this book. Go out, pick it up, find it on eBay, Amazon, thrift books, whatever you can. Find this book, read it. It was really good. Again, as always, guys, thank you. I appreciate y'all for stopping by and watching my reviews. Y'all have a good one.